Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. This is an EAR episode on the American Doofus channel. And I'm Barry Welsh. I'm the host of the American Doofus show. And on this particular episode of EAR, End All Racism, we're going to be looking at the history of race because racism developed because of differences perceived through race. So without knowing our history, we're often deemed to repeat it. And many of us in the white community don't know all there is to know about history. I heard a comment on the NFL network, oddly enough. One of the gentlemen on there was talking about this being Black History Month and said it should just be History Month. You know, Black history should have always been part of our history because Black people are part of our nation and have been since its inception. And the same with Native American history and the same with Hispanic history. We're doomed to repeat it if we don't recognize it and learn from it. And I'm happy to have Star here tonight. To share a little bit about the history of race. And first of all, I've got to give my condolences, Star, on behalf of myself and all the viewers. You had a loss in the family, and we had to postpone. And just our deepest sympathies, our thoughts, our prayers, our love.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gary.
And
I
thank you for
appreciate it.
being on here. I appreciate you. So thank you
Thank you.
for being on here. Now, on to something a little more positive. You were nominated for an award. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or did you get an award?
I was nominated.
Okay.
I'm a finalist, and it's a Women in Technology, and it's a super competitive kind of global award. And someone nominated me for it in my company, and I was like, whatever. I actually didn't even really take time. I took time to fill everything out and all this, and no one talks about themselves, so.
I know.
And then, I got my, our CEO said, hey, I see you're up for this award. He's like, kudos. And I'm like, what? And so I was really shocked. So in the midst of all of the, the tragedy going on and stuff like that, I get that. And yeah, so it really kind of lifted me a little bit. So thank you for remembering, because
incredibly awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Best of luck. I hope you win the award. It's for Women in Technology?
Women in Technology, yes.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Excellent. Well, the history of race. From a white person perspective, the miniseries Roots in 1977 by Alex Haley was historic to me because it exposed Black history on an incredibly small degree, but it showed that there were things that most white Americans were not aware of. And I think we have gone so much farther than that little blip, and very little of it's being shared, and that's what we're going to try to do tonight.
Excellent, excellent. I in formulating some of the information, I have a full library of books, and I'm a professional student, I think, on a lot of different subjects. But the concept of race to me has always really been fascinating. And so kind of as a melanated woman living in this world that constantly reminds me kind of that my skin means something less than or inferior, well, to some less intelligent beings, I've kind of long been curious about how skin color, something as minute as skin color, came to be used as some defining factor or a measure of if you will, another person's humanity, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
So so let me just add, this is my disclaimer. I don't profess to be some subject matter expert in the area of race and its flawed application. I do have, however, some substantive experiences in matters of racial discrimination, segregation, animus, along with standing up to those that are inflicted, kind of as the late great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing so eloquently framed, the disease of white supremacy. Um, so, um, so, you know, and looking at our involvement with EAR, this is really important to me, and it's really near and dear. And I actually thought about studying um, the history of race and doing, like, you know, just getting a degree in, like, not just Black studies, but the history of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I think is how it would be framed. But looking at EAR and our mission statement and what we're trying to do, I actually think that um, you know, the objective here is really to take a brief exploration of how we, as a global society of human beings, came to divide ourselves along this minuscule line, and how that tiny fracture has come to be such a rich, or had such a significant break in the framework of our existence, and how we treat each other, you know,
Yes. Yes.
in terms of humanity, you know. So, you know, there, people may be familiar with this term Sankofa. It's used commonly in the African American community and globally, and it's
What was
derived from
the
the
term again?
Akan
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What was the term again?
Sankofa.
Sankofa?
Sankofa.
S A
Sankofa.
K Sankofa. San.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that word is derived from the Akan tribe in Ghana, West Africa, which literally means it's not taboo to fetch what you forgot. It's not taboo to fetch what you forgot. And
So
so in modern terms, go ahead.
I was going to say, so basically it applies to the fact that um, the Black history is still there and it's okay to go back and retrieve
That's right.
it. Is it, am I reading right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. So as you pointed out, kind of in modern terms, you know, many use this concept to point the importance of one's understanding of his or her past to understand his or her future, you know, just as you so eloquently pointed out. So hence why we kind of within EAR thought it really important to begin our mission to end all racism with an understanding of how we as human beings came to such vitriolic divisions amongst ourselves, along with the flawed concept of race. That's where we are right now. That's why we're having this conversation.
Right. You're exactly right. It's more, um, it, it's more about identity
Yes. Yes.
than it is about any kind of supremacy.
Yeah. And the whole concept started that way as an ideology. It started as the word itself was like, you know, it alluded to kinship. You know, it was so, you know, let's talk about the textbook definition of race and kind of, so according to Webster's dictionary, you know, race is a human invented shorthand term used to describe and categorize people into various social groups based on characteristics like skin color, physical traits, genetic, hereditary, etc. So it
Did you say
it is,
race was a shorthand term?
yes,
I'm sorry.
yes,
My disclaimer.
uh-huh,
I'm coming into this as I'm playing the part of a viewer. I'm sitting here listening to all of this, just like we didn't exchange notes on anything. I'm learning as I'm going. So I'm
yeah.
going to interrupt every once in a while
No, that's
to,
fine.
to ask, you know, did you say race was a shorthand term? Is it like an acronym or something, or?
Yeah, I think what they meant is, when they say shorthand term, I think they were saying this all-inclusive thing that defined all of these characteristics and physical features and genetic heredity,
Okay.
in terms of, just an all-encompassing. I think that's what they meant by that.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's well researched and documented in academia and amongst scholars that that the concept of race simply meant that a group of people shared a kinship or group affiliation, um, of some sort. So, when you really think about it, that's unity.
Right.
Initially, that's how that word, that concept started out. And it was actually, like I said, a unifying term. um, as pointed out, I have this book. It's called The Iceman Inheritance. It's by Michael Bradley, and a brilliant book. It takes a look at humanity, racism, um, kind of how the world has become this amalgamation of all of its experiences. It's a brilliant book if you ever have it. So his name is Michael Bradley. And so, he kind of points out, that term or the concept really didn't show up in that sense until like the late 1500s, early 1600s. It didn't show up in the English language until even then.
Well, okay. Let me venture a guess. Late 1500s, early 1600s. That's when Spain, France, Portugal, they started to the European started to colonize. They started
Yes.
to travel.
Yeah. Explore.
They
Yeah.
started to experience different differences in people that were
That's right.
noticeable, and
Yeah.
and a term that was scientifically supposed to represent connection gets twisted and becomes the most divisive thing on our planet, race.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When
You're spot on. You're spot on. So again, it didn't really show up until then, that exploration. And I think you bring a really interesting point in that, it's that exploration that generated this discovery, or this sight of new people, different cultures, um, different people, different environments that that these people weren't used to.
and
So
and at the same time, I imagine there were some on the ships that were like, my gosh, look at these incredible people.
yes,
While there were some that were going, we've got to capitalize on our dominance of these people.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, you're spot on. So we talk about that word showing up in the English language. So really, we can see that term, that concept of race is a human invention.
Right.
It's a human invention,
Right.
and which makes it even more flawed because we know we're flawed, right? So
Right.
on so many levels, you know. So I mean, think about it. You fast forward into like the 1700s, and from the studies that I've done, what I see is the shift of race from a concept of communal identity to an ideology of spreading one group or separating one group, mainly Anglo-Saxons, from anyone, to not considered Anglo-Saxons. So you got that difference, and so it's not even white at this point.
Mhm.
That term didn't show up until like later. It showed up like centuries later. But when you look at European, identity, or European race, um, as it was then, it was like Anglo-Saxons.
Right.
And so even that concept, and I found that interesting, that concept of color didn't show up until race showed up.
And the Anglo-Saxons first started going into the Middle East as
Yeah,
as part of protection of um, religious tourists.
that's right. That's right. With the
To
Crusades.
Jerusalem. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'm always fascinated how these things kind of intersect and come together to create an outcome. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. You know, race is one of those bad things. So, um, again, you know, mainly Anglo-Saxons, and anyone that wasn't considered Anglo-Saxon, that divide, that fissure was starting to really come apart. So one of the key factors, I think, in this shift in ideology was like you said, uh, the pervasiveness of European colonization,
Hmm.
um, and colonialism. So it's here that we kind of begin to see the dynamics of, some may say, detriment of capitalism. So you were spot on. I mean, that was a collision.
Hmm.
That was just bound to happen, because you have people that are exploring these different lands and they're seeing these different things, and then you have to remember that a lot of the you know, the like, explorers were subject of their kings and queens.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so the kings and queens said, hey, we like this gold thing.
Yeah.
How about if you see some gold out there, let us know where it is, and we'll just go in and send the armies in, and we'll just take over.
Yeah.
You know, we like these jewels, you know, we like these, you know, these coconuts, and all of the things that they had not experienced in their land and in their environments, and that they would see in these different worlds. Or they would write back and say, hey, Queen Isabella, we see these beautiful dark-skinned people and they're very nice, you know,
Yeah.
we think we can enslave them. You
Yeah.
know, that was actually, Columbus actually said that. He
Yeah.
actually wrote that letter back he phoned home and sent that back.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're starting to see like kind of this collision of all of these things, you know, especially capitalism. So with that capitalism, I think, came the need for cheap, and again, I dare say, disposable labor. Because, and I say disposable in the sense of like, shedding one's humanity, by assigning or identifying that person as something other or inferior. So, you know, that started early on. So when
It's
I
written into
think,
our Constitution.
yeah, it absolutely
It's
is. And
actually written into our, and it's still there.
it's still there.
It's still there in the United States Constitution that anyone that's not a white person is considered 3/5 of a citizen and only this, when determining how many representatives each state will get to Congress.
That's right.
It had nothing to do with human rights or liberties or anything like that. It's only there for voting purposes.
Yeah. And I'll point out something later, you know.
And it's a detestable thing. And it's not something we bring up and relish. It's something we bring up and say, maybe we ought to start thinking about correcting this.
Yeah. Versus, versus, well, that's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus saying that
Yeah.
that's the way it is. And when we obfuscate from the truth, that whole concept of that's the way it is, that's how we get to where we are right now, I
Right.
think.
Right.
How we become such a separated society, which is painful on so many fronts, you know. So, but you know, kind of with that, you know, that other, that concept of the other. And I'm sure that when they started loading these slaves, you know, early in early 1700s and late 1600s, because there were Africans that were exploring the world as well. So even when the colonialists came to America and landed in Virginia, there were some Black people in that party that weren't slaves.
Mm-hmm.
They were, some of them were indentured, and we'll talk about that a little bit and what that meant and the difference between slavery and indenturehood, really meant. But when they were loading these people onto these boats, it had to be painful for some of them. but they were so aligned with religion, with the papacy, and with their kings and queens that they had to find some way to limit the atrocity of it, by creating this concept of, well, they're enslaved and they're going to be used as subjects, and we really don't know what these people are. And so they're not really even human. So it started, that whole spiral just started then.
Yeah, you justify an abhorrent behavior by dehumanizing the people you're doing that behavior to.
Exactly.
And
And it didn't, that level of dehumanization was kind of common in Europe at the time. When you look at even the papacy, think about it, all knowledge had to go to the head of the papacy. They wanted people to not, and I think there's some of that going on even now. They wanted people to not be educated. They wanted to have all the power and be the only ones that could understand this word of God, because we're here to represent you for God.
why would the United States defund public education unless it was to control who had access to the education?
That's right. It's history repeating itself.
And
It's history.
oh
I
my
mean,
gosh,
think about it.
is it history repeating itself? The dehumanization going on by QAnon, saying that Tom Hanks is a vampire and a baby killer and a cannibal. Tom Hanks, okay?
I know that one of the most
Tom,
kind dudes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean,
you got to dehumanize them in order to justify the behavior that you're perpetrating upon humanity yourself.
that's right. That's right.
So it
I mean,
hasn't changed in since the 1700s.
yeah, I've always been fascinated too, when we talk about the Crusades, the fact that the Catholic Church, when Gutenberg said, hey, I want everyone to have this knowledge. I love God so much. I want everybody to have this knowledge. When he took copies of the Bible that he had printed off of his printing press to the papacy, they put him in jail.
Yeah.
They
They
deemed
wanted
him
to control who had access to the word.
They deemed him a heretic.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the level of thinking that we're talking about in this Renaissance, and this, this kind of formulation of the perfect storm that became race and later hatred.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
That's just my take on it. But yeah, so kind of let's look at another factor that kind of helped morph that concept of race into something detrimental to humanity. With the early 1700s and late 1800s came what was known as the period of Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
The period of Enlightenment. So mind you, Europeans had been in this dark age where, they were, it's a known fact, their cattle was living in the house with them. They were at war all the time. The Anglo-Saxons were at war with with the Germans, with the English, before they even established countries. Everybody was at war.
Right.
And
Or
so
they're war with each other.
yeah,
A lot
when
of
you're
times.
constantly at war.
All of that. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're constantly at war, you cannot develop a society. When you're constantly at war, you cannot develop in terms of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where they were. So now, we got, this period of enlightenment, and everybody is like, this sort of intellectual period of exploration and cultural and academic refinement, and, this, again, period of exploration.
It's
so
to be a nerd.
Yeah, yeah.
They want to learn.
Discovery.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that was the exploration, because they were seeing different things and how the world functioned. The world wasn't so flat anymore.
Right.
So you have guys like Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who divided the human species. How much time did it take him to go and divide the human species into 5 races based on the size of their skulls? And the fact that there weren't so many intelligent people in the world, everybody bought it. Everybody was like, hey, he must be right. He's academic. and
Yeah.
he did the study, you know, there was no one to prove him wrong, you know, that kind of dangerous thinking, you know, and then, you know, how people, even Darwin, how he took the theory of evolution, and which was initially assigned kind of to plant and animal life, but it was later used by Europeans to justify slavery and colonization. But I think what people don't realize too is that a lot of the abolitionists used it as a counter to the dehumanization of people and slavery.
Hmm.
So it was really skewed, and it was used for the good and for the bad.
As all
Um,
propaganda is.
yeah,
All
yeah,
propaganda is used either for good or for the bad, and sometimes for both.
that's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, going back to this, going back to capitalism and defining race. So history kind of tells us that, you know, exploration and later colonization was partly driven by greed and that idea of expansionism, like we talked about, these explorers going back and wanting to please their kings and queens, because after all, it was the people that funded the royalty that funded exploration.
Right.
And so these people, the Magellans of the world, the Columbuses of the world, you know, they were like, hey, I have to go and find this stuff for my king and my king, for my country.
Right.
So kind of the blind leading the blind in that respect. But kind of this exploration of native lands, it wasn't only one of greed, but it was of exploitation. So what was often documented by Columbus and Hernan Cortez and Amerigo Vespucci, um, he called these people savages, you know, kind of because they didn't look like anything that they had ever known or had ever seen. And, you
They
know,
didn't
again,
speak,
it's just this,
they
yeah,
didn't speak the same language.
didn't
They
speak the
didn't dress
language.
the same. They didn't have the same eating habits.
Right,
So they must be lesser than,
right, yeah.
instead of yeah, it's, and that still goes on today as well.
Yeah. So again, like you point out, this idea of other than or the others or less than human. Um, it was being woven into the psyche of culture in Europe during those ages, throughout those ages, and even now. So you can see all of these factors kind of begin to align. And interestingly enough, in the case of the American experiment, so we're talking about Virginia, 1676 or so, the idea of race had not quite caught on, like we talked about before, where you had like these African indentured people that came over
Mhm.
on the Mayflower, and you had the European indentured people that came over. And so that idea, the concept of indentured servant was more of a contractual, a non-permanent status.
Right. It's like a 7-year hired hand, and then once you serve the 7 years, you're free to go. Supposedly. Now,
Right,
there were
right.
nefarious acts on all that as well.
Right. And even on the continent, you know, in different parts of Europe, that whole idea of indentured servitude came with, it was kind of like the early sharecropping.
Right.
People were
Exactly.
poor, you know, and these landowners and feudal lords, they had all of this land and they weren't going to work it themselves.
Right.
So I'll let you work this off, you know, if you do this, this, and this, you know. So I liken back, it just reminded me of one of my favorite movies of all time, War Horse.
Yeah.
Remember War Horse?
Mhm.
Such a beautiful movie, such a beautiful horse.
Yeah.
But his family, they were indentured servants, even in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about it.
Yeah.
So my idea of feudal lords and servitude and indentured servants kind of likens back to that. But so you know, we're talking about 1776, and so it wasn't until a group, and this is all in Virginia, wasn't until this group of indentured servants and now incoming African slaves. So you see, there were black indentured servants that were there. But now with exploration and colonialism, slavery was at its inception. The Spaniards and even Europeans that caught on like fire. And so, you see these African slaves now coming in, and now you have these indentured servants. And at one point, they rose in revolt against the English colonists. So the colonists, of course, were like, we can't have this. They were so alarmed that they basically knew that the two groups had to be separated in order for them to survive. Because, mind you, they're already fighting these natives that were here that were not going along nicely. They fought tooth and nail. Right. And so they were just basically like, just forget them. They're not going to work. We don't want to fight them for their freedom. We'll just bring some people over here. So you start to see people fight, for their freedom, and rightfully so. And so, that's when this governing party or the governing class first began to create laws that segregated these two groups and permanently enslaved Africans. So, of course, this gave the white indentures, a new status over the Africans. And so, it kind of started this divide and conquer practice, if you will.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, and I'm not just speaking this off the top of my head. This is well researched, and it's, we can show a list of, books and things like that, and that back this up. I mean, this is well-known history. So, kind of moving from this point, the first legal use of the term white appeared in Virginia. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Virginia, like when we talk about American history, Virginia is like the magnet. Virginia is the inception of how a lot of this started and how we got to where we are. Even though Virginia,
it's the home to a lot of the founding fathers.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
Washington, Jefferson.
So, we that legal term of white, it appeared in, it was a colonial document. And I've seen this document myself. Like I'm a student of George Mason. I went to George Mason University. So,
awesome.
And I studied technology at Volgenau School of Technology, but I used to go over to the history department because they had cool stuff.
Out at the history department.
Yeah, they had cool stuff, so I was like, there was stuff there, there was history there that I would not have been exposed to or not have had access to had I not gone there. So, this whole concept of white, again, it appeared in this colonial document, and it stated, and I'm quoting, whatsoever English or other white man or woman being free shall intermarry with a Negro, mulatto, or Indian man or woman, born or free, shall within 3 months after such marriage be banished and removed from the dominion forever.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And so, from that,
so they needed a term to define people that weren't British.
That's right.
That weren't subjects of the crown, that were
That's
here,
right.
To divide them from themselves, so that you get the subjects of the crown at the top. You've got this other from varying countries and varying places, but they're still white, even though we wouldn't have said that up until this document.
Right.
They call them something. They're not black like these people over here, so they're white.
Yeah, and I would venture to say I don't think that's the first time that color was woven into this fabric, but I think that's one of the first instances of color being used as a dividing factor.
Yeah,
I think that's really, really important history. And so this ideology of race kind of burned through the colonies and into the initial Constitution, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's think about it.
The Declaration of Independence almost wasn't ratified over slavery.
Yeah.
Over the southern state, the northern states wanted to wanted to abolish it then. The southern
And
states
listen,
refused, and I think it was Franklin that says, you know, we'll kick this issue down we'll kick this can down the road. You know, someone else will deal with the issue of slavery. We've got our issue's freedom.
yeah,
And
that's
here,
right.
and here we are in
Freedom for us,
2021,
for them.
still dealing with the issue.
Yeah, freedom for white men.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Let's make that
yeah,
very
freedom for
clear.
white men. And that's interesting you say that, because you know, this whole the dominion of Virginia, you know, of course they were subject to the King of England
Mhm.
and the Queen of England, but you know, a lot of that ideology is seen as nostalgic in Virginia. You know, it's
Yeah,
seen as
heritage.
but I think people don't even really realize the basis of what they're saying sometimes when they use that language, or when they carry, you know, these corpses of hatred kind of on the naming of the roads and all of this stuff, you know. So, um, you know, you know, that ideology, like I said, it burned kind of through, you know, into the Constitution. So even Thomas Jefferson in 1790, he wrote in the first census that citizenship applied to free white males, free white females, and other free persons. And then if you look at it, that first census, he wrote that enslaved blacks only constitute 3/5 of a person in that count. And so it's debatable. Some people say, well, they only deem black people 3/5 of a human, and then there's the other side of the argument, and people say, well, they were talking about the count, they weren't talking about. But I dare say that that concept of 3/5 of a human being later perpetuated itself into justifying uh, uh, slaveholders into treating human beings as chattels,
Yeah,
as in this idea of chattel slavery. No slavery or no indentured concept around the world was as uh, horrific, let me just say, as chattel slavery in the United States.
now can you,
And I'm always
for
amazed at
those
how
that,
we hold ourselves up to be this beacon of freedom and democracy, when we sometimes are still the worst terrorists in the world.
yeah, can you define that term for those viewers that may not understand it?
Chattel slavery.
Yes.
Yes. So the idea of chattel slavery, with that comes the dehumanization, that encompasses the beatings, the whippings, the cutting off of the feet, the branding, basically treating human beings as cattle.
Cattle. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
basically treating human beings as cattle.
I just thought some of our viewers may, you know, I was aware of the term. I just thought some of the viewers may not be, and wanted to make sure
Now that's a good
we
point.
we defined such a defining term.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, you know, fast forward, we're still in 1790, and, you know, the Naturalization Act came. And in that, in that act stated that to be a U.S. citizen of America, you had to be white. So basically, only free whites could be U.S. citizens, and that stood for a long time,
Right.
and it perpetuated itself well into the 19th and 20th century.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, because you know, when you look at,
It's still
you know,
that,
you look at,
you know,
go
I mean,
ahead.
it's still here. It's still here. People
Yeah,
say, go back to where you came from. You know,
yeah,
I mean, as ignorant and asinine as it is, it still happens.
yeah,
It's
it
still
does.
here. You know, it's
Yeah,
still like you don't belong here because you
yeah.
don't look like me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really, it's a sad testament to this. On the one hand, we hold ourselves up as this beacon,
Yeah.
and then on the other hand, we still have um, all of these little paper cuts that have turned into festering sores
Yes.
in terms of democracy and humanity, and how we deal with people that are non-white.
Right.
How we
And
deal with people that have melanin.
if we, and that's what we're doing tonight. That's what this episode's about. It's about addressing some of those sores so that they don't continue to fester, so we can identify and be aware of them, and work to heal those, because they're not healed yet.
That's right.
They're not healed yet.
Yeah, and until we're honest about the fact that this mindset, this disease of white supremacy ideology,
Mhm.
until we're willing to deal with the fact that that is woven um, into the American psyche.
Yeah.
It's woven in. It has nothing to do with, like, some people say, well, my parents and my family we're immigrants and we came here and we worked hard, and nobody worked harder than slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just be honest about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody worked harder than slaves. And so to have a culture after Reconstruction, to have people, and after the Civil War, to have people talk about Black people as lazy and
I know.
shiftless and
And,
um,
and that's still,
no
and still,
good.
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're gonna make sure that they don't have any opportunities, and then
That's
we're gonna call them lazy because there's nothing for them to do.
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not hard to see.
Yeah. Well, the problem was, though, and I think people miss this fact. The problem was that during Reconstruction, uh, African Americans were like, okay, if they don't want us to be a part of their society, we just won't. We're going to go and build our own capital. But every time we did that,
It
we
got
got
ugly.
burned out because white people were jealous
Mhm.
of how we just rose up like a phoenix. How can they do that? How can they have something better than me? Because America told them that if you can't be better than a Negro, who can you be better than?
Yeah.
That was the thinking.
Yeah.
That's the thinking.
Yeah.
And growing up in the South, I know that. I know that for myself. So, just kind of how all of these, like these sores kind of fester, like we talked about before. But what's interesting is that all the slaves that came into Reconstruction, they had all the knowledge of how to work the land. They had invented stuff that they couldn't claim patents for because they were slaves. They knew how to get work done. But when they got blocked out of all of that in Reconstruction, after the viewing of the Birth of a Nation,
Mhm.
in 1917, and Woodrow Wilson's like, this is true. Then that was the rise of the KKK,
Right.
and people started
The Birth of a Nation
really.
is a movie, a motion picture, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
No,
Birth
I
of a
just
Nation.
wanted to add that in case anybody didn't know.
Yeah, go look that up. It's a really
It-
powerful.
yeah.
But and so what Woodrow Wilson told the American psyche, and what Birth of a Nation told American white people, was like, yeah, that's how it is. And, we got to rise up out of this. And so that's when the popularization of the Klan and these laws around not really wanting to do anything about the brutalization and terrorism of white people against Black people. And America supported that.
Yes.
It's a shameful past, but the beauty of it is, if there is any to be found, is that we can still make a difference and we can still change that mindset, and
Absolutely.
which is still very pervasive.
Absolutely it is. And
Yeah,
a lot of it's based on ignorance.
it
And
absolutely
and
is.
and if there's just but one person that sees what we're doing here tonight and rethinks how they've always thought,
Yeah,
it's worth it.
it's
It's a
taught.
start.
That any level of hatred is really taught. And I liken back to my father. My father served in World War II, the Korean War, and a bit of Vietnam. And he would talk about, he was a sergeant, a brilliant man, but he could not, he was never going to get above the rank of being an enlisted man, because at that time, the services were segregated and things like that. And I've read this in other instances too, but I had living proof. He said that what happened was that they wanted to make a lot of the white servicemen leaders and wanted to make them officers. And, they played down Black soldiers as, like kind of, they were the hands, they were to do all the work and everything. He said, but my father said, but oddly enough, what they came to realize is that a lot of the white people that they were bringing in and putting in these positions of leadership could not read or write either, couldn't read or write. And so they were finding that there were a lot of intelligent Black men that were doing the work, but it was getting usurped by these lesser and more ignorant, people that were propped up under the guise of racism in America and white supremacy.
Yeah, and again, this, we're talking about these things for the purpose of identity,
Yeah.
for the purpose of history, for the purpose of knowledge and learning from what's happened in the past, so we don't repeat it and we stop
That's right.
repeating it, because we are repeating it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think that we need to kind of get people at a younger age. A lot of this is ingrained in people. They teach it in their homes, or they make little jokes and things like that,
Yeah.
and their kids catch on to it. And then when their kids get into the world, they're like, well, my parents said this. And some of them, like we've witnessed, Marie, when she talked about her experiences and how she kind of had to come out of that, and how she just always knew that that wasn't right. That's what I think the purpose and the function, one of the functions of EAR will be.
I agree.
To really have these conversations and allow people to share their experiences around race in America and what that really means and what the truth about it is.
Yeah, and next week, and next episode, we're going to talk about present. We're going to talk about like from the 1950s to where we're at now.
Mm-hmm.
And then the week after that, we're going to talk about what we see as the future.
Yeah, it's essential that people kind of have a timeline, of history.
Yeah.
Again, that concept of Sankofa. We can never understand where we're going if we don't know where we came from.
Yeah,
We can't understand what to do next if we don't understand how we got to where we are right now.
And the same thing is true for the white community. We can go back and realize the things that were wrong and say, hey, I am sorry that happened. I wasn't there. I didn't do anything about it, but you've lost so much culture. You've lost so much history. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened. And if more white people did that, we'd go a long way towards healing.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's simply because the communities of color, the black community, the brown community, the Native American community, they're not wanting supremacy, they're wanting equality.
Exactly.
And somehow the white psyche across the board can't process that.
Yeah, it's fear. It's a human reaction to, it's a matter of fear. I think the fear comes in losing the edge, losing that edge where you had this advantage in this society, and now you're talking, everybody else is coming in and they're capitalizing on their humanity.
Yeah.
That puts me having to compete,
Yeah.
And let's think about it. I mean, in America, for a long time, white people really didn't have to compete. They just they needed to have a friend or a relative in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and going back to what you said about us, about Africans, we lost our language, we lost our culture, a part of our culture, but we came to America. And when you really think about it, American culture is Black culture.
Sure.
Everything that we do, when it comes down to music.
I was going to say my favorite thing in the world is rock and roll music,
Yeah,
And that's Chuck Berry.
that's right.
That's
We
Chuck
are
Berry.
American
I
culture.
don't,
And
I don't care what anybody said. Chuck Berry invented rock and roll.
yeah, I like to
Yeah,
remind young African American people of that. There is nothing in America that is fun or that is intelligent or that was even built that doesn't have our fingerprint on it.
yeah,
And I say that with all conviction and knowing what I know about history. And that's a sense of pride, so shifting that mindset from we were slaves, from we were slaves to we are America.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's about identity.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's about identity. It's about not dwelling on the fact that there was this horrible event, this what peculiar institution was
yeah.
that was
Peculiar institution.
the
Yeah,
term I believe
right.
that was used back then.
Yeah,
And we can't um, we can't erase that.
no,
Um, but that's not where we are now. Even though there are some in the white community that would like to go back to that, and
yeah,
I'm saying that just keeping it 100, okay,
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
keeping it real. There are some but that's not where we are. So let's change the identity of humanity and take it away from race and focus it back on where it should have been according to Jesus, back
yeah,
on loving, back on treating people the way you want to be treated, back on giving, back on away from greed and towards sharing. I know I'm a communist, okay, whatever you want to call me. I consider myself a Christian, but
yeah.
that's just me. So
The key word in communism is common.
yeah, communal, it's
Communal.
taking
That's
care of the
right.
community.
Yeah.
But um, I do want to touch on one thing before we go. Um, some science, and again, that turns a lot of people off, but it shouldn't. We should, well, anyway. Um, DNA altered by trauma.
Yes.
Okay, can you talk about that just without getting too technical or anything?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of
Well,
explain the what possibly could have happened and is happening.
I mean, I have to go back to Dr. Joyce DeGruy. She explains it so beautifully in this concept of post-traumatic slave disorder,
Okay.
and she goes into the molecular level of trauma and how that impacts people when you have been you've gone through this level of trauma and detriment and terrorism, and how it perpetuates itself from generation to generation. Every cell in your body is a receptor. Every cell in your body is a receptor. And so when you're constantly receiving trauma, you're constantly receiving negative energy, you're constantly being told that you're less than, and things like that. What happens is when you birth the next generation, you're carrying that trauma in your cells, in your DNA to the next generation. And so it perpetuates itself, or it comes out in ways that have been measured in terms of how those traumatized beings move in the world, how they act in the world, how they think in the world. This thought of having to have permission to do things, and she goes into that molecular level, and she does it so beautifully. So if you ever have a chance to read Dr. Joyce DeGruy and that concept of post-traumatic slave disorder, it is intriguing, it is fascinating, and you may even learn something about yourself.
Awesome.
And why you act and carry yourself and move in the world the way that you do.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for sharing everything you've shared tonight.
absolutely. It's my pleasure. I live and breathe and things trigger bits of information for me and different, and it makes me go and look, see who's done the work, or read and explore. And that's the beauty of it too. I would like to encourage everybody to understand this history, understand these concepts. Do the homework for yourself, because you may find that you'll become a better person. You'll become more empathetic and more understanding, and have a clear vision and an understanding of how the world works, and how this construct of racism is so flawed.
Yeah, because we really are all connected.
That's right.
We
Yeah.
really are all connected, like it or not. And
We absolutely,
the better the least among us do, the better we all do.
it's
And
absolutely true.
anybody that tells you any different's lying to you. That's just the way it's the way it works.
Don't believe the hype.
That's the way it was constructed, and that's the way it works the best. And when we try to change it, we screw it up.
Yeah, we do. So we have a lot of work to do. I
Yeah,
think
we do.
have.
Can we see your shirt?
Oh yes, this is my new EAR shirt.
We rise together.
That's right.
Just what we were talking about. I got mine's. I've got End All Racism. I don't know if you can see it with the EAR at the bottom. And again, thanks to our buddy Apollo for designing these shirts and for getting them to us. And
yes, he did. He just great work. Great work.
Now,
Very essential.
Coming up, we're going to try to get back together Wednesday night for another EAR episode. And we're going to talk like from the 50s to where we're at now. And I'd like to possibly bring on Comedic King to talk with us about where we are. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think that would be great. If he has that knowledge, people that are passionate about this work and have that knowledge, the more the merrier.
Yeah,
that would be great.
Because everybody that has even a small concept of an answer of how we can all move forward, I think we need to hear from them.
That's right. And I really wanted to make sure that I put this knowledge or information out there based on research.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not just my opinion. And I think anybody that wants to come on and do that, that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
It's facts over feelings, if you will.
Our version, right?
Yeah, because a lot of the things we talked about tonight, people aren't going to want to hear because it's going to get in their feelings, especially in the white community.
Yeah.
And they're facts, and you can look them up. So this isn't about trying to make somebody. It's not about supremacy. It's about identity, and it's about turning from race as an identity and turning back to the identity of humanity. And that's right. That's one of the goals of EAR, in my opinion.
And if I can share, I've talked about my travels before, but I grew up in housing project, in Georgia. I talked to you about my teachers put me in special ed, right?
Yeah.
So, I just
because you asked too many questions.
So, but this need to know for myself has given me so many opportunities, has given me the privilege of exploring the world, having traveled to so many countries. That curiosity of wanting to know better and do better really just opened up so many doors for me. But the biggest part of that was like understanding other people's culture.
Yeah.
Understanding.
I so much want to travel for that, just to experience other people's culture.
To me, that difference was the beauty. The difference was the beauty. Yeah. And having so many friends and having just met so many people around the world. I actually lived in Australia for about 3.5 years, right there in the outback. And I was a part of I lived amongst the Aboriginal people. And I'm gonna tell this story real quick. But I volunteered at this place called St. Mary's. And a lot of the Aboriginal kids would come into St. Mary's, and they would, you know, kind of train them and get them ready for school. And there was this little kid named John. And so he would come and he just latched on to me. I'm telling you, some of those kids were psychic because they would communicate like psych. So he would latch on and we would play soccer, and he loved it that I was an athlete, you know. And so his grandmother, true story, his grandmother, this guy came and got me, this guy named Russell. He said, "Hey, this lady wants to talk to you about John John. She wants to thank you." And so I go out to the bush, they call it out bush. And I went out there, and it's this really humble setting. And she lived in this little humble building. It looked kind of like a housing project for all intents and purposes. And I go there, and there's this beautiful, beautiful older Aboriginal woman. She has the white hair and the really dark skin, beautiful woman. And she says, like in a really low voice, she said, "I want to thank you for being there and really helping John John." And she went under her bed and she got a painting, and it was this painting of leaves, this Aboriginal painting, beautiful painting of leaves. And she unrolled it and she signed the back of it, and I took a picture of her with it. And this guy Russell was like, he said, he said, "You don't even know who that is, do you?" And I said, "I don't, Russell." He said, "That's Gloria Pijari. Gloria Pijari has sold." She was one of the original people that did Aboriginal art and brought it to the world. Gloria Pijari has sold paintings at Sotheby's, or someone has sold them on her behalf for $70,000, $80,000.
And she just signs the back of one and hands it to you because you helped out.
That's my life. That's my life. And I say that because I open my heart to people.
I have absolutely no doubt that you're speaking the truth, because since you've been on here, I've been contacted by people that talk about how inspiring you are, and you know how they wish they could pick your brain, and they just love you. And it's because of, I mean, it's easy to do, you know, it's because of the person you are.
Yeah, I love people, and I just that love for people has afforded me a very good life.
And I think the love for people is something we both share, and something that's going to propel EAR.
Yeah, I saw that in you. And when I said, I want to be on your board. Let me just be on your board. You know.
I'm so glad you did. And I'm so glad you are.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. And we will do this again.
Absolutely.
This is EAR, End All Racism. On behalf of STAR, I'm Barry Welsh. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, God bless each other. Okay? God bless each other. Think about that. All right? I'm wishing God's blessings upon all of you, but all of you, God bless each other.
That's right.
It's not about race. It's about humanity.
It's a web of humanity. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the time.
Love you.
Love you. Bye.
Peace. Bye-bye.